and understanding, you've got different stakeholders, different constituents, and they are all going to want and need different things from you, right? So the better you can understand that, the better you can understand where you're aligned, and you sort of say, yes, that's absolutely the way I see it too. Or, you know what, I actually don't see that, but how can we still get you what you want, right? So I think it's just really understanding that people want and need different things, and then you have something to work with. And maybe there's alignment, and maybe there isn't, but hopefully you still get to a different solution and something that is going to serve them.
So that, would you suggest that within this 60, 90 days, that the CFO shares their perception of what other departments need, their help, as like informal contract? So you'll get this report, this insight, the head of HR on attrition rates and the cost for the company or the sales or the other groups. Do you think it's something the CFO can go above and beyond in just producing the numbers and the board decks and try to provide more services to the rest?
Yeah.
But a formal agreement, so they're held accountable.
Yeah, so I think some of that depends on the culture, right? There are some people who are going to find that a little bit too formal, and they're going to feel put on the spot about what they've got to deliver. So I think you've got to gauge that. There's some other people who maybe an email where you sort of say, hey, summarizing our conversation, this is what I heard you say, does this sound right? Like, that may be adequate. So to me, I think it really depends on the organization and sort of what the culture is around that.
Yeah, I think it comes down to setting the right expectations on day one. Like, when you start to that first day, what is it? Sit down with your new boss and say, like, what's success going to look like 90 days from now? What will we want to see? Not in terms of like the outcomes, but in terms of like what's the return on our mission to go on this, come up with this plan. And I think that you have to decide if you just want a job, or do you want to grow and continue in your quest to be your best at becoming a chief financial enabler. But in my view, this is my personal choice, like I wouldn't want to take a job where you're just a bean counter. And there are jobs like that. There's plenty. Most of them are like that. And you can get them, and that's fine. But then just make sure all the other variables are there so that you can check that box, and that'll be one thing in your life that's like unknown, and you don't have to deal with it and worry too much about it. You're not on the stress diet, right? But if you want that, rush, and you're an adrenaline junkie of being in a growth, opportunity, then you don't look for all those check boxes. It's okay that not everything's there, but you want that to have a reciprocal kind of, someone that will receive whatever plan you come up with won't be rejected because it's perceived as pretentious or you're coming in. It's like you can actually say we can enable the sales executive to be more, productive because we can educate you on how to transition, let's say, from a perpetual license to a SaaS license, or if we're doing mostly services and transitioning into resale or distribution or other things I've seen in the past, or whether it's international experience, etc. Something you bring to the table, and then you see that there's the reception on the other side. Then I think that's like a good indicator that whatever was there before, and this is a comment I've made before, like anything you see is only the way it is because someone else decided it's that way. It can all be changed, just in general in the world, right? And it's especially true in a company. So the fact that it is the way it is isn't because that's the way it's supposed to be. It's just because that's the way it currently is. So that question, in my mind, in the first 90 days is pick those things that you can make an impact on that are going to be felt. And you're going to have someone that you can actually partner with that's receptive to it. And that will be rewarding, and that will lead to the next one. You're not going to solve everything all at once. You don't need to come up with a plan that says, here's how I'm going to fix the business. But you could say, these are things I think I could immediately start on. They're going to have an impact.
I would just say related to that, I think there's a conversation, and again, I think there's some reflection for you to do in terms of how you can make your best contribution. But there's also, as you're doing that assessment of what people want and need, like, do they need just a functional leader? Is that all they want? Is that all they're looking for? Or are they really looking for an enterprise level leader who's going to be a business partner, who's going to help them think about their function in a different way? And I think there is sort of that's often, I think, one of the transitions at the C-level is, right, you really go from being a functional head to really being a cross-functional business leader who's thinking about the strategy, about the business in every function, and who really owns that collectively with their peers. So I think that's part of the other thing in terms of what agreements you make is going to depend very much on what type of environment you find yourself in.
So if anyone has any questions, let's raise your hand.
Joe, actually more of a comment than a question, but I've had the benefit of joining a firm that really had sort of a very structured onboarding. So in a sense, your 90-day plan was sort of thought through. It happened to be a company with a very good executive team, and they all knew what they wanted in the candidate, and that transition was fantastic. And then I ended up interviewing with a firm that it could tell early on that there was no plan. They had a vacancy, you know? And since I enjoyed so much being part of a onboarding system where I kind of had some input, but it was kind of laid out, in like subsequent interviews with the leader, I actually kind of said, when I come back next week, if I could bring a skeleton of a 90-day plan so we could have a conversation around it and together build it. So I ended up creating an onboarding program where one didn't exist, but it certainly salted in success in the front end. So I'm just commenting on
It's
how
a great
important a
idea.
90-day is, though, you know.
I think it's helping both parties succeed. One of the things I did in one of a medical device company I worked for, the CEO allowed me to meet with folks 2 weeks prior to I starting the D-Day. So we had a get-together with everyone in finance, so I would not be a stranger when I started on the day one. I met with my direct reports for lunch one-on-one, and I learned after that one of them was eyeing for the job as a CFO. So that got out on the table, and I helped mentor this person. So I think starting 20 days before, 30 days before can help this building up the trust. Any comments from the panel?
I think that's a great way to get the job. Right? I know it's the case, like I work at a big company, I tell my guys all the time, like the person with the plan that's the plan, right? Because it's much better than the no plan. So when someone does come forward and they have a plan, it means they put thought into it. I'm sure you could download it off the internet, but that's thought too. But if you can intelligently talk through it, I think that shows that you're taking initiative, et cetera, and that's something that I welcome. And I almost look for when I interview people, which is they're going to come tell me how they're going to, what do they need to be successful. It's my job to make sure I give them what they need and set them up to be successful, but they need to be active participants in that conversation. And my advice, if you do come into an organization that has an on-ramp plan, like the organization I work in now, it's not always a great plan, right? It's like it's just the way it is, like I said, because that's the way it's always been, and it fits the other 75,000 people that come into the organization, but might not be a good fit for you. So you could still, you could ignore it, B, and come up with a better plan if you have one, or you could do the parts that make sense and then add and adjust to your heart's desire.
So do you want us to answer the?
If you can.
Yeah, on meeting with your team prior to starting. I think the theme throughout the whole afternoon has been it depends.
That's a keyword. That's a keyword.
Yeah, it depends. Because you got to look at two things. One, that can be incredibly fruitful to have time outside of the office to get to know one another on a little more personal note than the formal walk-in on your first day, et cetera. And usually over a meal, team gathering is a really, really good idea. The other thing, though, I want you to consider, if this is a situation you'll be in, is that you have earned the right to clear your head between jobs. You have the right to do that. So sometimes it's actually better to not meet people in advance. If you're coming off a really stressful job and you've got 2 weeks in between, take the 2 weeks and just do fun things and clear your mind before going in on day one. So if you have the luxury, and I've had a couple of scenarios like that, this is my 5th career, so I've been in between jobs, and ones where I had the time to do it in between and I wasn't completely stressed out, it was the best decision ever, and it was something I asked for, and it sounds like you may have done so too. So you can ask for that, is there a chance I can meet the team in advance? But don't feel you have to if you're trying to ramp down, because you got to go in fresh. And turning off the brain with no responsibilities is a kind of beautiful thing, if you can get it, yeah.
So for the folks who may not have the benefit of coming here and getting the first 90 days, what if they mess up the first 90 days? Can they recover later? If on day 180, they say, well, I should have had a better 90-day plan, can they still start with a different angle and implement a better 90-day plan?
So actually, if I can start on that, I actually brought down Michael Watkins, who wrote the book, The First 90 Days, did a survey of, I think, 1,300 senior HR people, and over 90% agree agreed, or almost 90% agreed, that transitions into new roles are one of the most challenging things that senior leaders face in their career. And you've all done that more than once, and you know that to be true. They also, I think 3/4 of them agree that success or failure in the first 90 days is a very strong predictor of future success. So I think, the message is, a bad transition doesn't mean that you're doomed, but it definitely means you're less likely to be successful. So again, I think if things are not going well, you've got to go back to the discovery to understand what it is and whether it is recoverable and whether you want to invest that effort. Like, there may be some things that you just can't change, that, they're just already too entrenched, and I think you have to make a, sort of decision about whether it's worth your energy and effort. I think it's possible, but I think it's, your percentage is going down, the more the days tick by.
Yeah, I would double down on that. I would say you gotta go.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, because where you anchor yourself, even if you're really good at iterating and getting better from a really shitty beginning is going to end up in a really mediocre place after a long, long time. It's a lot of hard work. So you got to anchor high, and I think, Joe made this comment, this is, to me, it reminds me when I was a child and start like a new school every couple of years. You get to reinvent yourself. No one knows if you were the nerd in the back of the classroom or some goth kid, hanging out, or like a punk rock kid. Like, you get to be who you say you are, not who other people thought you were in your previous company. So anchor high and, make sure you crush it on those first 90 days. And then I would say, this is going to conflict again, start your next 90 days with pretty much the same principle, which is your job isn't done of, observing, analyzing what's going on, because you're going to discover the next level of stuff that you get to see as someone that's anchored high and accepted into the organization, and you can just continue to make an impact. So it's like, it should be like an ongoing thing, and that'll get you a lot better at thinking about, first 90 days. If you think about, you should come to, like, the way I look at it is, when I go to an interview, I came to this place looking for a job, and I'm going to leave looking for a job. While I'm here, I'm also going to be looking for a job. It could be here, and it's the organization's job is to make sure you want to stay there, right? And you're like, it's like a subscription model. You decide to continue your subscription and renew, right? But so you should be looking at those first 90. Every quarter is the next 90 days.
And one thing I want to mention is that, the first 90-day plan should be inclusive. Where I've seen it gone wrong is when somebody starts and they are handed a plan that they had no input on at all. So to the extent possible, when you're asking in the interview, what does success look like after 90 days, and you're getting your answer, hopefully you are also taking it one step further and saying, how can we devise the 90-day plan together? Can we perhaps sit down after 2 weeks in, after I've done some discovery, and come up with something that we both agree will be beneficial to the company? Because if you didn't have any input on that plan, and some of those things are just unattainable, you're going to fail. So I think Gil kind of hit it earlier, is under-promise, over-deliver. But you can't under-promise if you don't have a say in what you're promising. So, food for thought.
Any questions?
Sure. So, what have you used as your framework to address requests? Typically, folk come to the CFO to say, we think we need this new system, or we need this new process, and there's always a dollar amount attached to it. What's your framework for sort of addressing those kinds of concerns?
I'm not qualified enough to answer that.
Yeah.
Gil?
It is stage appropriate, but I would say, ideally, zero-based budgeting is what, pops in my mind, which is to say, I don't want to have an incremental conversation with anybody. I don't want to have, assume you don't have any budget. Now justify what it is you want to go do. And if it's more than you were doing before, or if it's less, it doesn't matter. Right? It still needs to be independently justifiable and have like an ROI, a business justification that says we're going to invest these dollars because we expect to get this return. Ideally, that return is monetary and measurable. It could be qualitative. I think it's more difficult when you step into a function that's already there, but you should very quickly strive to get there. So get to the quarterly milestones where you're having those quarterly business reviews, and definitely annually, and look at it as zero-based. So the conversation with your executives is not, your budget is a 5% increase from last year. It's, you don't have a budget for next year. You have targets, and you need to justify. It's like the mental exercise that ideally you go through, it's really difficult to do, is the mental exercise a startup CEO goes through, which is everyone's fired. Sorry, I keep hitting the microphone. Everyone's fired. You're out in the hallway. Who do we let back into the building, right? Only the people that we absolutely need. And that's the way you should think about your financial assets too, which is, where are we going to spend? Only where we absolutely need to, where it makes absolutely sense. The fact that we did last year, irrelevant. That's like sunk cost. So that should be like a guiding principle. Don't start with that as aggressively and, in your face as I do, on day one, but that's where you want to get to. And you can tell your business partner that's where we need to be getting to. And it's better for them too. They don't want to be wasted. Like if you're a VP of engineering, all the refactoring, like how much of the stuff is actually unused, code that we maintain that nobody ever actually uses and that we sell and we have we incur cost for? How many sellers are underperforming that we need to cycle through? Are the BDRs hitting their numbers, marketing budgets? Are the TV ads really working? Are they not working? So having that level of conversation in my mind is how you have that budget conversation.
And sorry, follow-up question.
Please, yeah.
So I came in a little bit later. I apologize.
You can ask your questions.
So further to that, how have you partnered with your COO to ensure that you are on the same page so that you can answer those kinds of questions, with some authority?
So in my experience, it's a partnership between the business lead and the CFO and the CEO. I don't want to be like, sometimes the CEO being involved is more harm than good. So recognizing that and stepping away and letting the CFO have an active dialogue that's without pressure, not visible. The sausage making happens, and they own the budget, right? And then you add it all up together at the company level and see that it makes sense, and we can hit all the targets that we want to hit. And there's going to be some conflict between them, and sometimes you're going to have to go up the food chain. But for the most part, if it's if it is truly zero based, you're going to be able to get a lot more accomplished, and the executive that owns that function is going to feel responsible for it and accountable for it, as opposed to just the incremental piece that they're asking for. Does that make sense?
Any other questions, Joyce?
What thoughts do you have on